Hi. So today I want us to begin with our Bible study and our class. Last week we went through Galatians 2 pretty quickly, and then some points I wanted you to look at and to study for yourselves to really begin to see what was going on and to try to relate it to the COVID-19 and how you could relate culture and class and some of those issues to what was going on in the government, and to ask you to look at Galatians and try to see culture in the Bible. Today, I want to spend some more time on this. It would seem that we're repeating some things, but I want to go a little bit more in depth because I felt I didn't do that very well. So here we go. And then we're going to get into the six effects of culture a little bit more in depth as well. So if you look back at Galatians, if you took the time to study this week, you will see that Galatia is actually a region that encompasses many cities. And one of those cities is Antioch in Syria, which is in the right hand side of your picture on the screen there. And Antioch in Syria is where Paul was addressing Peter and Barnabas and the other Jews who had been living with the Gentiles and treating them as equals. But when the people from Jerusalem came, they decided that it was too much, and they began to act differently. Now the issue in Galatia, Galatians, is circumcision first, and then certain cultural lifestyles. So the circumcision issue had been dealt with in Jerusalem Council, like we talked about before. But here there were still some Jews who were saying, in order to be Christian, you have to become like the Jews. And this was not exactly what the Bible had said. This was not exactly what the other apostles had said. So there was some confusion there. So these men had come down there to argue this point again. And Paul was saying, that point's already been settled. Why are you acting this way? Then we go on and we see that Galatia was also a place that was very much in the line of the spice trail and other trails that we had talked about before. And you can see on the chart there that on the right hand side there's the spice trail and the silk trail that we talked about before. And you can probably see there in the second picture on the right, towards the top of that, you can see where Galatia then would fit into that. And see, it was right on those trails. There was actually a major road going through this region that connected the east to the west. So there was also many other cultural influences going on as well here that was beginning to influence the faith. So when you get to Galatians chapter 3 and 4, you see Paul is talking about, O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth, and who has caused you to try and to turn away from this faith that you have so faithfully fought for, you have so hard fought for, and now I want to make sure that you are not tempted to go away from it, and calling them back to this point that Paul uses in many of his letters, to walk worthy of the calling for which you're called in Christ Jesus. So you can see that I'm switching between different screens and trying to stay on top of what I'm doing here, and I hope that you'll bear with me as I try to control these different screens, um, because I wanted you to be able to see the slides and not try to put them up on the screen like the paper before you, like you were looking at before. So if you have some questions, I encourage you to get into your Bible, get into the study Bibles like I showed you before. Do some research and see how cultural issues. Remember, circumcision was a cultural issue, not only a spiritual issue. It was a cultural issue for the Hebrew people. It was not an issue for the Gentiles because they were not given the promise. And to make that a cultural requirement upon them to become a Christian when Jesus did not require it, or the apostles did not require it, shows that it went from being a part of the mark of a Hebrew to being now they want everyone to do it. We see that today in many things in churches as well. People want people to follow this way and follow that way, and to try to always be, trying to tell people what to do and where to go and how to do things, and to put traditions on top of what it means to be a Christian. Many times we can see in church that many things that we call Christianity, some of them are very traditional issues. So if you also read in Paul's letters, and I think further in Galatians you're going to read about this, the promise, when Abraham was given the promise, Paul argues that the promise was given before circumcision. So if we're people of the promise, then how can we make circumcision an issue when the promise of Abraham that the world would be blessed because of him came before his circumcision issues? Again, culture, religion, we're going to talk about that today, coming into play, causing conflict in the church in different places where we're seeing it, and the apostles having to deal with it. And poor Peter, he's still struggling. He's still struggling. He in Acts chapter 10 and chapter 11, he's convinced that God does not show favoritism, but he's still struggling in his faith between when to act like a Jew and when to act like a Gentile, and is Judaism necessary for Christianity and not necessary for Christianity. If you have some questions and stuff, you can write them down. You can email me. I like I said, I don't want to make this class a heavy theological class where you get into a lot of discussions about theology, but we got to see how theology and culture and religion and faith all entangled together. As Dr. Oliver Phillips says, many times culture trumps religion. What I want people to concentrate on is faith, our faith in Christ, not necessarily our religion as Christians. We are Christ followers before anything else. So our faith needs to reflect Christ, and it needs to reflect the things of Christ, and it needs to reflect how he's calling us to live. And then we must take our culture and put it into balance with our faith. When our culture becomes secondary to our faith, then we're able to distinguish between some of these issues and not get so uptight about them that we want to say everybody has to do it the way that I do, everybody has to do it the way that we do, everybody has to do it the way our church does. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Now I want us to try and do a transition and begin to look at these 6 elements that we're talking about. Again, bear with me as I try to be the operator, the technician, the camera operator, and everything to try to help us be able to track along. So you see the 6 cultural systems that we began talking about last week: economic systems, marriage, education, legal and political, religious, and artistic. All 6 of these are very important. I'm not going to go through all 6 of them today, but I'm going to go through about 4 of them, 3 or 4 of them, and then you can do some research on how the others affect cultures. They're all 6 present in every culture all the time. One that I'm not going to talk about much, but I'll probably begin with this, is artistic. The artistic part of who we are and what we do comes out in many things in people's lives, in the way they dress, in the way they speak, in the cultural celebrations, in the things that are celebrated. And you'll see that coming out in many aspects. If you go and you look at ancient Greek and Roman history, you see how culture played a significant point in what they were doing, a significant thing in their faith, in their culture, in their statues, in their art, in their colosseums, in their homes. Archaeology is beginning to bear that out every day. This stuff is happening all the time. So let's go to the first one. I want to talk about economic systems. There are 2 basic economic systems in the world: capitalism and socialism. Communism is a part of socialism taken to the extreme. So they're basically two that people think about when we begin to think about economic system. And the capitalist system is based on more individuals gaining resources and services based on their ability to pay for them. So in our culture, we talk about people need to work hard and they need to be able to earn money and they need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps and they need to get money in the bank and you need to have all of these different things. It's a market driven system. The markets are very, very important, as you have seen and you'll continue to hear. Many of us have interesting parts of our lives that are based on markets. And then you have competition. Competition in capitalism is absolutely one of the foundational elements of capitalism. Um, the, 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 the competition between the weaker and the stronger, competition between small business and large business. It's all based on competition, how you can continue to grow and continue to grow and continue to grow. In socialism, it's more concerned with the state. The state coordinates and implements the production and distribution of basic resources through a central control system, and the people look to the state more for wage control, for price control, for how resources are distributed, and we know that this system doesn't always work. Neither of them work very, very well. But this socialism is based on cooperation more than competition. How can we cooperate to make sure that um, everybody has an opportunity to win, everybody has an opportunity to succeed? These are ideal systems, so we need to be careful in trying to argue which one is better than the other because one may not be better than the other. And we as Westerners tend to think that capitalism is better and everybody else is inferior to us, and therefore we must try to make a capitalist system out of everywhere we go. And and that's not necessarily true. And when we talk about religions, you're going to see how capitalism has actually become a pillar in many parts of Western Christianity and missionary work around the world. Some missionaries have tried to carry that capitalist ethic into their missionary work, which has caused some problems. Now, few societies are purely one or the other, so we always got to remember that no one society is more than the other. Um, you go from socialism to communism to capitalism. There's what's called social democracies. Even our capitalist system has some social aspects of it. Medicare, Medicaid, these kind of things. How do we take care of people? How do we take care of the poor? How do we take care of the needy? Those kind of things are social programs that are worked into a capitalist system. Next, we want to talk about family and marriage systems. This is really, really important in understanding different cultures because cultural aspects of family and marriage can make or break us in a cultural setting, not understanding how families and stuff are cultured are set up together could cause us to make assumptions and things that could really get us into hot water with people as we try to understand them. You see, there are two types of marriage and family systems: kinship systems and nuclear family systems. And you can probably begin to get in your mind where these two fit. Kinship system is based on blood relationships, solidarity in the family and the clan. They have consanguine relationships within kinship families, where it's genealogically and generational connection. So the family is a big family, multiple families living together, multiple people coming together. The whole society is based on this. When people tend to do business, the first thing they look to do business is, who am I related to, or who is this person related to, in order to do that. Understanding those family dynamics. You may find yourself in situations where a family owned business or families may be run by a patriarch. And that patriarch may or may not be present, but people go back to that patriarch and get advice and listen to what that patriarch has to say. So it takes on a different scheme for us in the Western society where that patriarchal relationship may not be as strong. The next one is the nuclear family, and this is based on a system called affinal kinship. Affinal kinship. So mostly Western societies, and now the family doesn't go as deep. It doesn't go as multi-generation. It's mostly based on the father, the mother, the children, and people related by marriage, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, and maybe go back to the grandparents. But it doesn't go all the way back as it does in the kinship type families. So you see many people who are moving to the United States come in here. What the program is to bring their family, and they bring their children, and they bring their spouse, but they also send back for their parents and their grandparents, and then the brother-in-law comes, and the sister-in-law comes, and the cousin comes, and the aunt comes, and it keeps going back. And in some instances, you hear people calling people uncle and auntie, and they're not really related to each other, but it's because of this kinship type relationship that goes way, way back. In our family, we have people that we call family members. We call auntie, and we call cousins. And I have a person we call a cousin who's actually an aunt, and an aunt who's actually a cousin, and an uncle who's not is not really an uncle, and and a brother who is a half brother. We don't make a distinction between a half brother and a whole brother. So you see that mixture, that nuclear family, but then it gets extended into that kinship type families. I'm sure you have some examples that within your family or within people you've met, you've tried to say, how are they related? How are they related? People meet our family and they say, well, why are some of your family members Martelly, and why are some of them Leonce, and why are some of them Joseph, and why are some of them Weeks? and they're not married. There's no marriage relationship. Well, those are all different parts of that generational kinship type, extended family type, where there'll be marriage and not marriage and broken up marriages and stuff. But basically, we call each other family because of the relationship that we have, not necessarily because of the blood that flows in our veins and the genes or genetic code. Family is relationship. And many parts of the world, family is relationships. In the United States, many people in the United States tend to make that distinction. My family is my family, and these are my friends or other people, and have a hard time bringing people into the family. But in most of the world, this is a natural thing, and it is a natural part of what they do. So I'm going to go back now, and we're going to understanding marriage and family is key to cultural intelligence. Next one I want to touch upon is legal and political systems. Every country has legal and political systems, whether we understand it or not, whether we in the West want to accept it the way it is, whether we want to judge it sometimes the way we look at it, and we want to say, well, is that really a legal system? Why are some people treated differently or not? But every country, every culture and subculture has a legal and a political system. So you see, the formal system is more like what we have in our westernized cultures, in our westernized areas, where we have a written constitution, we have written laws. Everybody is supposed to know the law. We talk about ignorance of the law is no excuse, and things like that. So it's based on a very formal system. But we know that there are informal laws within our system as well. The next type is the informal. It's less formalized and binding. Conventional wisdom is what governs how things are done. If you're part of that society, you're supposed to know who is who, know what laws are who, know what applies to who. Sometimes people in cultures and in cultural jobs, and as you meet different people or travel around the world, you see that people are treated differently based on their status or based on their clan. So some person may commit what we consider to be a crime, and you would see that people would say, oh, that person belongs to that family, they're part of this group, that's okay. But then another person who is not as prominent, who may not be as highly ranked in the community, may commit a lesser crime and get a harsher punishment. And we say that's unfair and it shouldn't be that way. But based in these systems, there are laws for how people do things. Laws are not always applied to everyone the same wherever you go. And before we begin to point our fingers at other people, before we begin to say that their system and their political and legal system is corrupt and is not good, we need to look at ours as well and see, is ours much better? We have those kind of things in our system. We have those kind of challenges in our system as well. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't be looking at corruption and things like that and as Christians and accept them, but I'm saying that part of our responsibility is to be able to try to understand people and where they're coming from so that we can try to relate to them better. This class is not about passing judgment and saying we're Christians or you got to do it this way, otherwise it's not going to work. This is to teach us how to be culturally intelligent, to learn how to adapt and to work with people in different areas. And by our influence and by our faith and by our life and by the power of the Holy Spirit, we can begin to influence change in different areas. Next one I want to touch upon is religious systems. And this is where many times our religiosity in the West gets us into trouble, because we come in and we tend to want to say, well, we know what's right. We've got the Bible, we've got this thing and the next thing. And if people aren't living the way that we think they should live, then they're wrong and they may be going to hell, or they're immoral, or they're unethical. And we start passing judgment and we don't even know the people. We may be in their country 10 minutes. We may have met them for half an hour. And all of a sudden we've become authorities on what's right or wrong and what's religious and what's not religious. We can all learn from other people in many ways, and we need to be cognizant of this. So there's a rational system. This is mostly in the West, and some of you may say rational in the West. We Christians don't believe in rationalism as part of Christianity. We think about faith, but finding reason-based scientific answers to supernatural with a focus on individual responsibility and work ethic, right? So you can see those interwoven Western things into that definition. Our faith is not based on rationality. In fact, we as Christians may argue many times that with a scientific method, saying that, people say that science and Christianity don't go together, and it comes from both sides, not just from Christians, but it comes from other people as well, saying, well, Christians are irrational people because they believe in the Bible and they believe in faith, and we believe in science. However, if you look back at how our faith developed, and you start looking at people way back, Albert Einstein, and before that, Charles and Boyle and those gentlemen, most of the Christian faith, if you start studying science and Christianity, most of the prominent scientists in our history were doing science to try to verify what was said in the Bible. And that's a whole nother discussion, a whole nother place we can go, but there's some really great articles and there's some really great biographies out there about the faith of some of our early scientists. So capitalism and the Protestant work ethic have been woven into this rational, westernized view of religion, right? So we're talking about religion, not necessarily Christianity. Capitalism and the Protestant work ethic, you hear people talk about diligence and hard work and frugality and accumulating capital. It's all become part of this religious aspect. Then the other side is mystical. The more mystical, supernatural powers, good and evil, tend to control how people live their lives. It's not so much based in faith and a book and God, but it's what's happening today. How is the moon, or how is the stars, or what's your horoscope, or what did the shaman say, or different things like that then begin to take effect in these things. Now, before we begin to be too critical, we they're good and they're bad and everything. So I don't know how many of you know this, but in the Islamic faith, it is actually can be immoral or unethical for an Islamic bank to charge a Muslim interest on loans because it is seen as taking advantage of your brother. Now, in the Western society, we may think that's preposterous. Why would you have a loan from a bank and there's no interest? So there's something for us to think about. The Bible talks about usury. It talks about forgiving debt. But how easy it is to get us in our Western North American thinking to talk about forgiving debt and having interest without the loans and those kind of different things. As Christians, we should try to respect and understand other people's beliefs before we try to put too much judgment on them. Again, it doesn't mean that what the Word of God says is not true and is not right, but it means that to be culturally intelligent, we should spend some time trying to understand different systems and different values and different things that people have before we tend to jump up and say, well, that is wrong and they shouldn't be doing it that way. Well, if that is true, then there are many things in our side of the world that we need to look at too that are wrong and are not true that we don't always get as upset about. So those are the ones that I wanted to speak about today, um, and try to give you some perspective on how the author gets into these things and the studies that they have done and trying to look at how these things are put into every culture. So, as I want to continue to keep challenging you to say, look for these cultural systems when you deal with people, when you meet people, when you're trying to understand them, when you find yourself in a situation that may seem, well, this doesn't make sense. Why are they doing it this way, or why are they looking at it this way? Try to maybe understand it from their perspective. Maybe try to ask some questions. Maybe say, well, why are you thinking this way? Well, how does your society view this? Why is this important to you? I'm trying to understand it and let them tell you their story. Let them share their value systems with you. And many times we have to share our value systems with other people as well, because if they're trying to come to live in the United States and they're trying to live here, they have to understand some of these things, because in some cultures, some of the things you do in your home culture may not translate into our culture. And you could get into political, you could get into legal, you can get into social issues, social challenges that are not right. And some of our refugees and some of our new arrivals have found themselves having to answer to the law in some of these areas and not understanding, well, what did I do, or what did I say, or what does this mean, or what is that? And why can't I discipline my children the way I wanted to discipline them in my own home country? Why is the politics this way or that way? What is a Republican and what is a Democrat? And why is it not important to help people regardless of what your party is? I mean, there's so many questions that could come out. And that is part of our cultural intelligence, to help people understand that, help them understand our economic system. How does it work? And why are some of the differences there when you see them struggling? And that's how we can build friendships, and that's how we can build bridges, and that's how we can begin to cross the bridge with other people culturally, is as we try to understand them and their challenges, and then they try to help us understand some of our challenges with their culture, and then we can find ways to help each other and to be strong. I could tell you many stories that Tamina and I have encountered, but I'm not going to do that here. We can do that when we get together, but these things come out to play every day in our interactions with people. So that's it for this week. I hope that this has been enlightening and challenging. I want to continue to ask you to look for it and look for how these things are coming together. We are having some interesting times, and God is with us, and He will always be with us no matter what it is, whether we can be together personally or whether we can be communicating with technology. I'm actually thinking about maybe doing a Zoom hangout maybe next week, see who wants to be a part of that. But we can find ways to continue to develop our faith, continue to grow our faith, continue to build our faith, even in times when we're socially separated, when we have issues going around with health and safety that we can't normally get together. We can also continue to pray for our government, continue to pray for the world, continue to pray for the people among us, and pray for healing, pray for restoration of health for many people who are sick. You don't necessarily have to know them, but if you drive by hospital, pray for the doctors and the nurses and the people who are there. If you see an ambulance or a police officer or a fire truck, maybe say a prayer for them. And God will help us through this time. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you online soon.